Yeah, I'm Des Freedman. I teach at Goldsmiths in London, and I've been a media activist for a long time. I'm currently the chair of the Media Reform Coalition, which is a group of media activists who came together after the phone hacking scandal and trying just to give a real profile to questions of media ownership, media regulation and media pluralism.
And just talking about media ownership and things, we just mentioned before about how wealth is filtering upwards. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, for me, Britain is becoming a more unequal place. You see that across a whole range of factors. So you see that the terrible figure that the 100 richest families have the same wealth as the poorest 30% of households, which is some 20 million people. And that kind of inequality, or rather the concentration of wealth in the hands of a few, you see that in the media, and you see that across different sectors of the media. You see it with a tiny number, 3 companies that control 70% of national newspaper circulation, and these are powerful companies. These aren't just dying beasts. These are companies, like the Daily Mail and Murdoch's News UK, which speak on and offline to many tens of millions of people. So there's that kind of structural inequality, and has been really, it has abused the kinds of media power that we've seen in this country. So that is something that's an urgent challenge for us.
Yeah, I mean, I heard you speaking downstairs about how even publishing agencies and cinemas and everything, so it's like media right across the board. Like, how can you escape that? How can you get away from that?
If you want to get a more diverse media, so in other words, you want a wider expression of different opinions. In other words, you want the media to talk in your dialect, not just speak like the Queen's English. If you want the media to look differently, to reflect the fact that Britain is not just white male. So it needs to look and feel and talk and address different issues. And that is going to mean doing a whole series of different things. At the top, it means breaking up some of the biggest, most powerful companies. And at the same time, from the other end, it's about trying to get some funding to make sure that we get these new or these marginalised voices. And I think there are endless ways of doing that. You can have regulation that says, as is applied in other areas, that monopolies are not good for us. They're not good for the economy. They're not good for our culture. So you break up those kind of monopolies. But you also, if you started to tax the Googles, and remember, this has been done in France. French got $50 million from Google. Well, let's take that money and let's put it into new forms of public interest journalism, into grassroots journalism, to tell the stories that aren't being told. So if you do it from both ends, I think you can start to address some of the real lack of diversity in the media.
Now, it's interesting you talk about regulation and breaking up monopolies and things. Not too long ago, we had the Leveson inquiry. What's happened there? I mean, has it been an opportunity missed?
Well, what happened since the Leveson inquiry is you saw media power defend itself. So to the extent that Leveson was asking for changes, and they were just changes about independent self-regulation, you had some of the largest newspaper companies, very powerful people and editors leaning on politicians, using their muscle and saying, and using very specious arguments about defending press freedom. I mean, that's their freedom to abuse immigrants and asylum seekers, to tell lies about ordinary people. So they're using that freedom to say, we don't want to change anything. Now, the trouble is that Leveson just focused on that element of press regulation and said only a few words about the questions of ownership and pluralism. And so that's what we're trying to correct, is to say that if you don't want the same mistakes to be made that led to phone hacking, if you don't want that kind of intrusion, you don't want that kind of snooping, that really is related to these giant corporations just obsessed with ratings, obsessed with the bottom line, obsessed with competing with each other. So if you have a much more decentralised and dispersed media system, you're less likely to do this in the first place.
And obviously that would affect, different problems with collusion between politicians in the media and that sort of thing. How endemic is that problem? I mean, how much is there, collusion with big businesses? I mean, it's like a triforce there,
Yeah. Well, whatever you may think of Leveson's recommendations, the inquiry sure as hell showed the networks of power that go on in this country. And by that, I mean the relationships. And these aren't just formal relationships, although there are plenty of them. These are the dinners they have together, the back doors that they use, the relationships. I think they're extremely collusive relationships between the top proprietors, top editors, senior politicians, and as we know, the top people in the Metropolitan Police. And of course, those links are likely to extend even further. So they were found out. But just being found out doesn't mean you're going to give up your power. And the question is, all of those people, political power, media power, and the police, all try to sort of rein this in. And once again, it comes back. You can't just ask people to change their behaviour. You have to try and create the conditions to change those conditions which gave rise to the abuse of power in the first place. If a company gets too big, if a media company gets too big, a politician is more likely to listen to it. If you have a whole range of different smaller companies, particularly ones that kind of, speak to the world's problems as they are, then I think you're not going to have that build-up of power. You're not going to have Murdoch, just walking in the back door, sometimes the front door, because they can stand up to him. And the tragedy is that politicians are too scared to stand up to these media moguls, and we need to do something urgently about that.
And just one final question here for you, Des, just keeping on the same track as the political stuff. You've mentioned downstairs about some of the tricks that are going on, presidential campaigning and things like that. What sort of things should people look out for in this general election campaign, and how can you turn your thinking away from them?
I think you just have to argue all the time for the media and put pressure on the media. And by that, I mean, if it's just letters to the national press or your own local or your own, the blog in your own village. The fact is, are they reporting politics as it affects you? Or are they pursuing an agenda which they're comfortable with, which basically seems to be that the only three people who count are there's three men, Farage, Cameron and Ed Miliband. That's it. That's not the election about. The election should be about what are we going to do about austerity? Who is going to save the NHS? Who is justifying the huge expenditure on occupying lands abroad? You have to fight, or in your local area, make it relevant to you. And if your media isn't doing that, then obviously you have a couple of options. One is start your own blog. Produce your own media if you can. Use the resources that we have. But at the same time, kick up a fuss, make a noise. A lot of journalists don't wake up in the morning thinking, right, I want to tell some lies or not tell truths. But actually, they work in institutions that make it hard to do that, to tell the truth. So put pressure on them. Write those letters, join those campaigns, put the pressure on, because we need a media system that is going to tell our stories. Otherwise, it's not a democracy.
And have you any organisations people should look for?
Well, I'm a member of the Media Reform Coalition, so if you're thinking about joining in with these actions around changing media ownership, then please get in touch with mediareform.org.uk and groups like Campaign for Press and Broadcasting Freedom. But obviously there's also the groups like Real Media trying to bring the different voices together, and that will be an exciting place to look at the stories that maybe aren't being told through the corporate media.